click record here. Pin my video. There we go. All right. Good morning, U.S. history. It's Thursday, April 2nd. A little moist outside, a little rain, a little mist going on, at least in my neck of the woods. Hope you guys are doing well. Today, we're going to be looking at the final note catcher for Unit 4, which is domestic issues. So we kind of chunked out some specific things that we can kind of take a look at and events that impacted the 1980s. So I'm going to share my screen here with you and this guy down. All right. So domestic issues of the 1980s. So the three big things that we're going to be looking at is the Exxon Valdez oil spill, the Challenger explosion, and the Just Say No program. This is again from Unit 4, the 1980s. Our learning target for today, I can compare Americans' political shift from a reform agenda to a conservative agenda. So it kind of goes back to what we had already talked about last week, where we're coming out of a more reformist agenda in the 60s and 70s, and now going into a conservative agenda in the 1980s. So again, reminder guys, anytime you see these blue links in the titles of the notes, those are going to take you to a YouTube link. I'm not going to show you the YouTube links in these presentations themselves. You can absolutely take that upon yourself to view that. But the very first one, it refers to the Exxon Valdez, Exxon being an oil company, Valdez is the name of the ship. It ran aground in Prince William Sound, Alaska, which is right here, on March 24th of 1989, and it spilled 11 million gallons of crude oil, so the unprocessed oil that gasoline, kerosene kind of comes from. That crude oil, 11 million gallons spilled here into Prince William Sound in Alaska. Is one of the most devastating human-caused environmental disasters. And in history, it is second only to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, about 10 years ago now. So there were some contributing factors. So the Exxon Shipping Company, the company that ran that boat, or really boat, the tanker, failed to supervise their crew. The crew was understaffed. There weren't enough people working it. And a lot of those guys, when they were working long hours, became very tired, and they failed to maintain radar. And the radar was telling you where they were in accordance to the depth that they needed for the ship. This quote comes from Greg Palast in 2008. "Forget the drunken skipper fable. As to Captain Joe Hazelwood," that's that guy here, he's the captain of the Exxon Valdez, "he was below deck, sleeping off his bender. At the helm, a third mate would have never collided with the Bligh Reef had he looked at his Raycast radar, but the radar was not turned on. In fact, the radar was left broken and disabled for more than a year, and Exxon's management knew it. It was too expensive to fix and operate." So basically, this guy's claiming that the captain of the ship was downstairs sleeping, that the third mate wasn't looking at the radar, but it wouldn't have mattered because the radar was broken and had been broken for over a year. So he's kind of citing some contributing factors as to why this ship ran aground. There were some other problems when it came to the cleanup of the Exxon Valdez. So they had a chemical. So, kind of sometimes if someone throws up in the hallway or in the classroom, and Jimmy will come in and spread some of that sawdust looking granular stuff, and it kind of soaks it up. Same deal. We had a chemical that they were going to fly over the oil spill by helicopter and drop it on the oil spill and kind of hopefully soak up all the oil. Well, the helicopter flew over, it dropped the chemical, but it missed its target whatsoever. So that was a failure on the cleanup part. So then they started putting in skimmers, and skimmers are kind of like these things that would float on the surface of the water and try to scoop up the oil, kind of like if you're cleaning a pool, if you work at a pool and you got to get the bugs and things off the surface of the water, you would use something called a skimmer. The skimmers got clogged with how much crude oil there was. And then they started just using hot water, and they were using these hoses to spray hot water to kind of break up the oil. But the problem with that is if you're spraying a high pressure hose, you're also displacing any of the smaller plant life, the mosses, the grasses, the reeds that were on the shoreline. If you're spraying it with a high pressure hose, it was going to kind of also destroy that as well. So there were some real problems there with the cleanup efforts. So I put some images here. You can kind of see these are some of these ships here. All the people in orange, they're volunteers, but you can see all this black stuff on the shore is crude oil that has washed up on the shore there in Alaska. You can see this guy, he's out in his boat. These are like inflatable things that they would use to kind of to isolate the crude oil from the water and be able to kind of push it all into one area and scoop it up. You can see the oil's just stuck all over his oar. It's just really thick, and it was an issue to kind of clean that up. So here's the downer, the environmental toll of the Exxon Valdez. Up to 250,000 seabirds were killed, about 2,800 otters, 300 harbor seals, bald eagles, orca whales, all the animal life that was kind of killed because of this. And then also the crews that were cleaning up were exposed. I mean, crude oil is a carcinogen. And so these people were exposed to toxic fumes and chemicals that could then develop into cancers later on that they normally would not have been exposed to. And here's the sad picture. There's some otters there that are their fur is matted in that oil. And some of the seabirds. So approximately 20 million gallons of crude oil remain in the bay today. It took about 25 years for wildlife to return to those pre-spill numbers. And then it came up to the Supreme Court case Exxon versus Baker, where Exxon was forced to pay $287 million in damages and about $5 billion in punitive damages. So a punishment there. So here's a graphic. You can see this is the Exxon and how long it took each one of these different animals to recover. So you can see, even though this happened in 1989, it took until about 2013 for the sea otter population to return. Some habitats and species, like the killed an entire killer whale pod, some herring, some of these other birds that they're unaware of. I mean, it took, like I said, about 25 years for that area to recover. So that is what we're referring to as Exxon Valdez. So that was one thing that we look at. Now we're looking at here is the Challenger disaster. And the Challenger is the name of one of the space shuttles that NASA was using at that time to put American astronauts into space. This occurred on January 28th of 1986. And I'll tell you right now, that was the year that I was in kindergarten. And the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart about 73 seconds into flight. So it launched, and about a minute or so later, it broke apart. This was the 10th mission for that particular shuttle. All 7 crew members aboard were killed. And it took years for this to kind of come out, but there was a rubber O-ring, a gasket, that was not designed to handle colder conditions. Now, granted, they're launching out of Florida, but there had been some colder mornings there. I mean, it's January, some mornings that had gotten cold, and these O-rings were not meant to handle cold conditions, and some of them cracked. And the cracking of the O-rings allowed burning gas from the rocket boosters to breach these exterior fuel tanks. So some of the burning gas from the rockets were able to cross into these big fuel tanks, thus causing the explosion. So here is the photo of the 7 astronauts aboard the Challenger. What was interesting about this and why it was such a big deal was this woman right here. Her name was Krista McAuliffe, and she was a teacher. She was a science teacher. And there was a contest for teachers. They wanted to have the first teacher in space, and there was all these plans about how she was going to be doing lessons from the space shuttle, and kids around the country were going to be able to watch it. And it was really trying to boost not only educators in space, but women in space. And Kristen McCall kind of, she had won the contest. She was trained to be an astronaut. She was going to go up into space. Unfortunately, she and the 6 other astronauts lost their lives in January of 1986. So you can see here's Challenger taking off from mission control from the launch pad. Here's the last photo of them as they're boarding the spaceship. And I've weighed back and forth on this. I've done it in class where I haven't shown the footage. I've done it where I have shown the footage. I would say in today's climate and world, you could probably, if you're really interested, it's obviously available on YouTube. But you can see that the shuttle here breaks up. So like I said, 73 minutes or 73 seconds after launch. Let's see. And kind of splits into two. It goes two ways. Part of it was, part of the rocket boosters. The other part was part of the shuttle. Yeah, so the space shuttle was one of those first events for me, kind of like 9/11, kind of like what we're living in right now, those generational events that people talk about. And here's why. 17% of the country viewed it live on television. There was so much hype behind Challenger, first teacher in space, all these things. I remember they were pulling the TV cart into the cafeteria for all the kids to sit and watch. And it really ended disastrously. 85% of Americans heard the news of the Challenger explosion within the hour. So again, we didn't have social media, we didn't have the internet, but within an hour, 85% of the country was aware that a disaster had occurred. NASA immediately put the shuttle program on a 32-month hiatus. So they stopped any and all shuttle program launches for almost 3 years. And it was used as a case study, and it's continued to use a case study for engineering safety. Again, we talked about the O-rings and the cracking and the breaching of the exterior fuel tanks, and workplace ethics. There's still in law schools, in business schools, when you look at ethics of kind of being a whistleblower, there were some folks at NASA that were claiming that they knew that this was a possible problem, and was pushed aside or kind of not paid attention to. And unfortunately, this disaster occurred. The Rogers Commission was launched to investigate this. And I would say, at some point, this speech I have linked here, President Reagan, there are times when the president goes on the news and is meant to kind of calm down a nation. And you got to imagine all these school kids are in the cafeteria watching the space shuttle launch with all their classmates. This disaster happens. Ronald Reagan goes on the news and gives an unbelievably fitting eulogy to those 7 astronauts, and claiming this, supporting the NASA and the space program, and kind of eulogizing the astronauts. It's a tremendous speech. Reagan had quite a few speeches that I've included in this unit. I would encourage you to go and view those. All right, shifting gears from environmental disasters to the space shuttle explosion, let's talk for a second about drugs. Nancy Reagan in the 80s, First Lady, wife of Ronald Reagan, launches the Just Say No program. So much like Michelle Obama in the lunch programs, and Melania Trump in the Be Best program. So First Ladies, their jobs, they kind of take on a social event or a social topic. And in this case, Nancy Reagan took on the Just Say No. And it was anti-drug program. And she was putting advertisements on television. It was part of their war, the government's war on drugs, and it was meant to discourage children from recreational drug use. And Nancy Reagan's quoted as saying, "Understanding what drugs can do to your children, peer pressure, and why they turn to drugs is the first step in solving the problem." So again, we're looking at not just drug use, but teenage experimental and recreational drug use to stop it immediately. And the phrase was "just say no." There were limited successes of that, but again, you can still see the impact of Just Say No today, with the Students Against drugs program, the RAD program, the SAD programs, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Just Say No kind of stemmed off a lot of these anti-drug programs that you see in schools, predominantly in elementary and middle schools. As a product of the schools in the 80s and 90s, remember quite often having high schoolers and police and people from the community coming in, and it kind of talks about the dangers of drug use and experimentation and kind of stopping that soon. So questions here should be reflected in your note catcher, but which of the following is not true about the Exxon Valdez oil spill? A, it occurred in the waters off of Texas. B, countless birds and marine animals were impacted. C, it impacted 1,300 miles of coastline. Or D, it occurred because an oil tanker hit a reef. Which of those is not true? Well, obviously we know that it is A, it occurred in the waters off Alaska, not Texas. Which of the following explains why early efforts to remove oil on the water in Prince William Sound were ineffective? A, the equipment became clogged and water currents moved the water in ways which made the cleanup ineffective. B, crews were unable to find enough booms to contain the oil. C, crews were unable to get the dispersants into the water. And D, the water was too shallow to be effective. Okay. Equipment became clogged, the skimmers and current moved the water, which made the cleanup ineffective. This one, we know what equipment was determined to have failed on the Challenger and the major reason for the accident. A, the external tank. B, the electrical system. C, the hydraulic system. Or D, an O-ring. We know it is the O-ring. D. Which First Lady promoted the anti-drug campaign Just Say No? Rosalind Carter, Michelle Obama, Barbara Bush, Nancy Reagan. The answer, of course, is Nancy Reagan. So 2 questions for you guys to think about and reflect on in your note catcher. Those who participated in the oil spill later fell to various diseases. Do you believe they should be entitled to financial compensation? So people show up to clean up the oil spill. They end up developing cancers they normally would not have developed had they not been exposed to it. Are they entitled to money? Think about that. Second one, the Challenger explosion was viewed by many Americans, especially in schools. Can you think of an example of an event in your lifetime that has shifted your worldview? How did it affect your family? I wonder what event we could talk about. Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing right there. Connor, you've stuck in there. Any questions? You can throw it in the chat box if you like. So yeah, just some things to think about here as we go into the rest of our Thursday. Looking ahead to tomorrow, the Unit 4 Learning Target Review. I've seen some submissions from folks already. Please pay attention to that part where we're talking about a 5-sentence paragraph for each response, and that you're looking to be citing examples from class. I've seen a lot of like bullet points and short blurbs. That's not really what the intent of that assignment is. It's really for you to take some time in that. If you need more than tomorrow to do it, then please take the weekend, take next week. Remember, the due dates are completely flexible, and you can have as many extensions as you would like. But yeah, if you're looking at the Learning Target Review, let's take some real time on that. Don't just kind of chunk through it and get it done. Assignment for today is, I hope you followed along and you can complete the note catcher as we went through those notes. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to shoot me an email. Otherwise, I don't have a planned Zoom meeting for you guys tomorrow, but just to kind of keep something on the lookout for looking into next week, probably give you the schedule on Monday. We'll do a check-in on Tuesday. We'll kind of look at what we need to do, but I'd like to start checking in with people, maybe in smaller groups or setting up some times just to meet with you guys. So kind of keep that in mind as we start heading into next week. Appreciate your time. I hope I answered any questions. If you don't have any more questions, I will look to see your assignments submitted through Canvas here today, tomorrow, and if you have any questions, let me know. All right, be safe, stay warm, wash your hands, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good day, U.S. History.